let's go ahead and start making this pumpkin spice syrup. So I'm going to give you some alternatives along the way, and I'll be keeping an eye out. Just so if you don't know me, when I'm looking away from you, I'm actually looking to see if you've asked me any questions, because that's where my computer is. So don't despair. I am not ignoring you. In fact, I'm paying better attention to you. So I have organic cane sugar, and I also have some organic dark brown sugar. You could totally do this with coconut sugar. You could also do this with maple syrup. So if you go to plantbasedinstantpot.com and look up fall syrup, and so I actually infuse maple syrup very similarly to what we're doing here. You could also infuse some date syrup if you wanted to as well, depending on where you're okay with as far as sugars and refined sugars go. Since this is kind of a decadent holiday class, we are going to be using some coconut oil in the brownies, and we're using some real sugar in this, but I will give you alternatives as well. Okay, so let's look overhead. I'm going to put a half a cup of each sugar. So when we do brown sugar, we always pack it in, right? Because it's soft. So that's how you kind of measure it. And if you want to make this less sweet, you certainly can use less sugar. And we could even add in more sugar later if we found that we just kind of were off. Okay, so we're using a decent amount of sugar there. We're going to put 1 cup of water in. And let me come back over here and open up my pumpkin can. Okay, so I'm going to take about a half a cup of the pumpkin. Another thing to know is actually Starbucks syrup doesn't have pumpkin in it. It's about the pumpkin spice blend, not about pumpkin. So if you don't like pumpkin, you can totally leave the pumpkin out. This is your syrup. You get to make it the way you want to make it. All right, and I'm getting some spices out, and we can do this a few different ways. So I'm going to use cinnamon sticks. Oh, that says ground cinnamon. Cinnamon sticks. And I'm going to put 2 in there. And actually, I think I'm going to mix this up a little bit first. I have a Halloween spatula. Is that not the cutest? Cheryl got that for me. Get this a little bit better. There we go. So I'm just going to mix the sugar and this together. I could have this on the heat. We are basically just making this into kind of a simple syrup. So if we were not putting spices in it, it could be ready as soon as it dissolved. But we're infusing it, which means we're going to make that liquid taste like the spices. Okay, now I'm going to put in a couple of cinnamon sticks. You could put in a whole teaspoon of ground cinnamon if you wanted to instead. We're going to use a mixture. It's ideal to use whole spices and things. I'm going to put about 3 whole cloves. Now, one of the things you can do, either you probably use cloves a lot or not very much. Those are strong. So they are new. So I'm still going to put 3 in. But what can happen if you bought cloves just for this, they can be super, super strong. So you might want to just do 1, especially if the clove flavor is not like your best friend. So now the other, I'm going to go ahead too, I think. Let me explain this to you, people who do not know me yet. I smell everything. So if this was a stew, I would smell it and whatever I'm thinking of putting in it at the same time. And you will have a very visceral reaction to that. Either it will be like, or yuck. Okay, so I may put some cardamom in there because I love cardamom a lot. And you could put some in too. It's not in the recipe, but I'm going to throw 4 cardamom pods in there. And here's the thing, you can make this syrup be whatever you want it to be. And that's the main thing I want you to understand too. We're gonna go ahead and we're gonna put a good amount of nutmeg in there. This one isn't very strong. I was saying to put half a teaspoon, but I think I'm gonna put 3/4 of a half a teaspoon because it smells pretty strong. And then with the ginger, you can use ground ginger, or we could use fresh ginger. You wouldn't even have to skin it. You just go ahead and slice it. And I said a half a teaspoon of ginger. So it just depends. If you really like that strong gingery flavor, you could up that. If cinnamon is not your favorite, you could lower that down. Hate cloves? Leave it out. This is all your deal. So I'm just going to turn this on about medium-high heat. And I'm just going to mix some of this up. Now, here's why I like whole spices better. See, a lot of times whole spices are going to taste fresher because the heat is going to activate them. The heat will activate the ground as well. Okay? And as this cooks, I can keep smelling it to see what I think. Do I need something else? I could also just kind of take a taste. Ooh, that tastes good already. Because even just from the water, most of the sugar is already dissolved. So what we're doing with the heat is not as much dissolving the sugar as infusing the liquid with the spice flavor. Because we use ground spices, and if we only use ground spices, what's going to happen is there's going to be some little pieces in our syrup and what we make, and that's okay. Don't worry too much about that. If you wanted to be super picky, you could put a coffee filter in the strainer when we strain it. So we're going to cook this, bring it up to kind of a boil, bring it down, let it thicken a little bit, which means kind of let some of that water boil out and boil down. Also, it adds the heat to the spices to infuse them in. If we used only whole spices, and I think you could use pieces of nutmeg. I don't have any whole nutmegs right now, but it would be really hard to break off some pieces of that anyhow, so you probably would just be grating it in fresh. So it would be a little bit less pieces. But even if you're making, if you go to healthyslowcooking.com, I have a slow cooker pumpkin spice latte. And one of the things, it's a lot of this stuff in with cold brew coffee in your Instant Pot. I encourage you to blend it because the pumpkin's going to sink. So this syrup, we're still going to have to shake up and everything like that. Okay, let's see what we got going here. So we're letting this get to a little bit of a boil. It smells so good in here, you guys. Now I'm going to turn it down. And I'm just going to let it simmer for about, I don't know, 5 minutes or so. Sometimes I would even take it off now and just let it basically steep in the hot water. But I want it to go a little bit deeper. So you could make this totally with like monk fruit, stevia, what's the other one? The alcohol sugar. And what I would do is just add it at the end. So make this like a tea. It's not going to keep as long. So the sugar is kind of a preservative, though you do need to store this in the fridge. Okay. And see, we're not really seeing a lot. Probably the sediment is down here. I'm trying to get the sediment to come up. Oh, it smells so good. We'll let it go just a minute more, but you see how it's You can probably see from here to here, hopefully you can kind of see that, it's kind of reduced a little bit. And that's going to help it. It's also going to thicken up a little bit in the fridge. So I think with that, we can go ahead and turn this off. And I'm going to let this sit and steep over here so I don't pour hot stuff on me. Do the syrup, strain the syrup, which is completely cool now. You see how that's pretty thick? And I saved the spatula from it because I knew I would be scraping this out. The more you scrape out, the more you get to keep, and the less you have to clean. It tastes amazing. Since you can't see me, you don't know that I just licked the side of that pan. But, so what's holding some of this up? Pumpkin. So you're going to have to kind of push some things through. And here, I'll let you see it from the front too. So I usually just scrape along because the pumpkin and some of the single spices are going to muck up the holes and block them up. Okay, so I'm getting stuff for the drink. See, is this one colder or is this one colder? This one's colder. I'm going to tell you how to make this a mocktail too, so don't despair. And we're going to look at two kinds of rum, an alcoholic rum and a non-alcoholic rum. Plus, I like this one because it has a skull on it. It's from Raleigh, which is near Durham, where I live, Durham, North Carolina. It's a spiced rum. This I just got, which is a non-alcoholic spirit. So it has no alcohol in it, and it gives you some of those same rich flavors. So I've got these about halfway full of ice. I'm going to open the cider. It's also a really good way to make your cider go longer because you're making it into a cocktail. It makes it a lower alcohol cocktail. So if you're just looking to have something lower alcohol, you could not add rum or bourbon. We're just going to add a little bit. You could add as much as an ounce, but you could also just add a teaspoon or two for the flavor. Or you could use this non-alcoholic one. I also have a fancy orange bitters, and then these are tiki bitters. And you could totally use the tiki bitters if you wanted to, especially with this rum. And we're just going to put a little bit of bitters in there. And we're going to put a little bit of our pumpkin spice syrup. So let me get back in here. So see how most of this has come through? You can still see a little bit of the pumpkin and some things here. We can push it through, but it is going to make it thick. To me, the important thing when you're infusing a syrup, and we can honestly put this in a cookie. This could also be spread on toast. It'd be delicious. So you could take the cinnamon sticks out and the cardamom pods and go with that. Let me sit this over here. Find another tablespoon measure. And it's up to you. So this is our syrup. And I'll let you see it from here too. So instead of, you could use an sparkling apple cider instead of using a hard cider. You could try this orange. I think this orange would work great with the pumpkin and the spices. I think that would be a really good Christmas drink, but it's still pretty fall. And then you could use a little bit of rum, a little bit of bourbon. You could also, depending on how you taste this, we could do a squeeze of lime in here. So I'm going to try just 1 tablespoon. Cheryl gets a cocktail because she's going to be helping me clean. Okay, and let's use, let me smell the tiki bitters. It's toasted coconut, pineapple, and allspice. It's the allspice I think will be particularly nice with the rum. So I'm just going to put a couple of drops, like 5 or so. Now, some have these little droppers. The ones you may have something like that, just where, you know, like a sauce, and it'll come out in drops too. Okay, we've got that. Let's put a little bit of rum in there. And you can measure that out too. You literally could do a tablespoon if you wanted to, or a teaspoon. I like the spiced rum because this is what we have, and we love a spiced rum. Set this over to the side. We could also use this non-alcoholic rum to make this a lower alcohol content cocktail. And I'm gonna see if I can top this stuff off. Yeah, usually I can make 1 bottle be 2 cocktails, so that makes that 6-pack last a really long time for me and Cheryl. I'm gonna use my Halloween straw. We're gonna mix it up. I'm gonna taste it and then decide if I need some acid with it. I don't really feel like I need any. You could certainly put a little bit of lime or a little bit of lemon with that, or even a little bit of orange. But I'm finding that I'm getting some of that same from the hardness of the hard cider. So and Cheryl's going to say it tastes too much like alcohol. I probably should have just put a teaspoon in hers. So another thing we can do is just add another tablespoon of syrup, and that should take some of that away. And I think both could use two tablespoons for me. That's probably going to be too sweet for some of you. That's a ticket.